A lot of people have been upset and frustrated because of the outcome of the 2024 election, and there are a lot of good reasons for this. I thought it would be worthwhile, however, to look at a few areas where there could potentially be some positive things that happen as a result of the election. For the most part, we'll be overlooking the bad things that are likely to happen, which is maybe a strange approach, but there are lots of other places where people are talking about these things, and I wanted to do something different. The first thing I want to talk about is RFK Jr. potentially having a role in the new administration. While he is controversial for some of his views, he also has a lot of positions that are good and widely popular. One of his big areas of focus is the pharmaceutical industry. He has criticized Big Pharma for its corrupt influence over government and for how its pursuit of profit is often at the expense of regular Americans. He understands that there is a serious problem with regulatory capture by the industry and has said that bringing that to an end would be one of his priorities. He has also talked about limiting costs for prescription drugs, saying that they should be capped to prices similar to those in Europe. It's uncommon to hear most political leaders, except for someone like Bernie Sanders, go against the pharma industry in this way. Many members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, take lots of money from the pharma industry. It would be very good to have someone like RFK in government putting pressure on pharma companies and openly calling out their corruption. RFK has also made public health a priority, and in particular, America's weight problem. This is such an important issue, but it rarely receives any attention in the political world. The rate of obesity has increased from around 13% in the 1960s to over 40% today. This change represents a significant increase in human suffering and in the number of people who die every year. People who are obese on average live 3 to 10 years less. They are also much more likely to suffer from chronic pain and from other conditions such as arthritis, asthma, diabetes, heart disease, and even cancer. There are a number of causes for this major shift that has taken place, but certainly one of the most important factors is the food that people eat and how the food industry has effectively polluted many of our foods. Food companies have engineered their foods to maximize profits, but with no consideration to the resulting negative health effects. The highly processed foods that they produce are intentionally designed to increase their appeal and addictiveness, but often in ways that make these foods very unhealthy. They are often loaded with excessive amounts of sugar, salt, and unhealthy fats, and are low in nutritionally important elements like vitamins and minerals. They also often have dyes, preservatives, and other chemicals added to them. A number of these chemicals are banned or restricted in other countries based on studies that have shown them to be unsafe. For example, potassium bromate is used in some baked foods, despite evidence that it can cause cancer. Another example is Red 40, which is used for coloring in a variety of foods and drinks. It has been linked to behavioral problems in children. The food industry, of course, lobbies to prevent these chemicals from being banned in the US, which is why many of them continue to be used. Pesticides that are used in food production that are also more strictly regulated in other countries are another area of concern. RFK would fight to promote higher safety standards for our food. He has made it clear that this is one of his highest priorities. He would also work to promote healthier foods, including by revising the government food recommendations, which are currently heavily influenced by food industry lobbying. These sorts of changes would be a start towards shifting our focus more towards human health instead of corporate profits. If RFK is able to make improvements on even some of these issues, that would be a positive change. There is a lot of support for these sorts of policies. For RFK's ideas that are more controversial, he will likely receive a lot of pushback. He would probably not be successful making changes in these other areas due to the strong opposition he would face. The pushback he gets in these areas, and the support he gets for his other good policies, would hopefully shape his impact so that overall it is mostly positive. But of course, this all depends on if he does get a position in the new government. He has been nominated to be the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, but he might not be confirmed. It also depends on if he is actually able to be effective in making any of these changes. Next, there is the war in Ukraine. The war has dragged on for almost 3 years. In that time, around 60,000 or more Ukrainians have died, and over 80,000 Russians. Hundreds of thousands have also been wounded on both sides. Since the end of 2022, for the past 2 years, the war has basically been a stalemate, with neither side being able to capture much territory. Yet, as the war has continued, thousands of people have continued to die. Just in the past few months, from September through November, over 15,000 people have been killed. It was always unlikely that Ukraine would be able to retake all or even a significant portion of the territory it lost, and this reality has become increasingly clear with time. With such a high death toll, and it being unlikely that Ukraine will be able to recapture its territory, the war continuing serves no purpose. Yet despite this, the war has continued, and there's been no movement towards reaching a peace agreement. A big part of the reason why the war has continued is because of the influence of the U.S., and in particular, the Biden administration. Early in the conflict, Ukraine and Russia were in negotiations and were working towards a possible peace agreement. The U.S. and other Western nations wanted to see Russia weakened and used their influence to discourage Ukraine from negotiating. These early peace talks came to an end, and the war continued. More recently, when there was again talk of negotiations, the Biden administration made it clear that they were opposed to this. Many in the U.S. government and defense establishment see Russia as America's great enemy, which is why they want the war to continue. They see the war as an opportunity for the U.S. to strike at Russia. In many ways, the war is a conflict between U.S. global dominance and a resurgence of Russian imperialism, neither of which are positive forces. The ultimate hope of many U.S. leaders is that Putin would be overthrown in a coup. They aim to maximize pressure on Russia to make this happen, even though regime changes pushed by the U.S. almost always lead to disaster and result in an even worse situation. Besides weakening Russia, the U.S. also benefits from the war because the war strengthens and brings profits to the U.S. arms industry. The close relationship between military leaders and the arms industry gives the industry influence over military leaders and military thinking. This influence is mainly a result of the very active revolving door between the military and the arms industry. Industry influence serves as another force that pushes for the continuation of the war. Those in the U.S. government and military establishment who push for the war to continue indefinitely do so while disregarding the cost in human life and the cost to Ukraine. They only have a narrow focus on their military strategic goals and place what is best for Ukrainians in the background. Ukraine's economy has declined by around a third since the start of the war. Around 7 million people have fled the country, and 4 million are internally displaced. This, along with the hundreds of thousands of people who have been wounded or killed, is a very high cost for Ukraine. The war continuing doesn't benefit Ukraine, and in the long run, Russia will likely have an advantage because it is a much larger country and has access to many more resources, including a much bigger population, 140 million to 40 million people. At the same time, Ukraine's foreign support will likely decline as countries grow tired of the cost and lose the motivation to continue their support. If Trump is able to end the war by accepting the situation as it is and accepting negotiations, that would be a good thing. The war has lasted too long and needs to come to an end. But it does depend a lot on the context and details of a potential peace deal. If Trump completely abandons Ukraine and Ukraine is forced to accept a bad deal, or if Ukraine is allowed to be defeated by Russia, that would be a disaster. Hopefully, though, this is not the approach that is taken, and instead, Ukraine is supported in coming to a peace agreement. Ukraine will likely have to give up its provinces that have been occupied by Russia. It will also likely have to make commitments to remain neutral and not join NATO. If Ukraine is supported in these negotiations, the more unreasonable Russian demands could be rejected. By supporting Ukraine, a balanced peace agreement could be reached that creates a stable and lasting peace. The Biden administration has essentially opposed all negotiations up to this point and sought to continue the war indefinitely. A change from this policy would be a positive step. An end to the war would mean the end to thousands of people being killed and injured every month, and Ukraine would have the opportunity to recover and rebuild. Another area where there could possibly be some good is in the way that different groups respond to the election. The shock of Trump winning the popular vote and making big gains among Black and Latino voters has hit Democrats hard and is making them ask some serious questions. It shows that something is seriously wrong with the approach that Democrats have taken. This will hopefully push them to learn some lessons and make some changes. Progressives have been saying for a long time that Democrats need to focus on popular economic policies that can create real, tangible improvements in people's lives. Hopefully, Democratic leaders will listen to their base and start fighting for issues like raising the minimum wage and fixing the healthcare system, issues that are very popular among Democratic voters and will help them win over the working class. A change towards a focus on key economic policies would have a huge impact because these are the issues that people really care about, and they are the issues that can inspire Democratic voters. If Democrats make this shift, they will be in a much better position for future elections. At the same time, Republicans are likely to face serious backlash to their total control of government. With Republicans in control of the presidency, the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court, they will receive all of the blame when things go bad. If Republicans mess things up, which there are a lot of areas where this seems likely to happen, they will be solely responsible and people will rightly put the blame on them. There is a good chance that they will try to push some very unpopular policies, such as cutting Social Security. They have wanted to do this for a long time, and now they have the opportunity. If they go through with something like this, they will face a lot of opposition. American politics almost always swings back and forth between the two parties. With Republicans taking such complete control of government, there is a good chance that the swing back to Democrats will also be very strong. If Democrats learn some of the right lessons from their losses, they will be on a much better path. This, combined with any backlash towards Republican rule, could set Democrats up for big wins in the future. While there is a lot of uncertainty about the next few years, and there will likely be a number of bad things that happen, there are also some areas where there could be some positive changes. We should take advantage of this and try to push for these things where we can.